Hello and welcome to Piano Lessons, Boulder. We continue our celebration of Clara Schumann's bicentennial year. Clara was born on 13th September 1819, and this is part 2 of our series on the creative friendship between Brahms and Clara Schumann. But first I would like to show you some photographs of Robert and Clara Schumann and Brahms. So here is a photograph of Robert and Clara Schumann taken at the Studio Ullstein in Berlin. And here is the first image of Brahms that we have. It's a pencil sketch made when he was 19 years old. And Robert Schumann paid the artist for this sketch. And then we have a photograph of Brahms at the age of 25, looking heartbreakingly handsome and poetic. He was conducting a women's choir in Hamburg at the time, and every girl in the choir was in love with him. Hardly surprising. Anyway, so to continue our study of the creative friendship, in part 1 we saw that the 20-year-old Brahms met Clara on her 34th birthday, and both Robert and Clara Schumann fell in love with his music and invited him to stay with them. And so Brahms spent the happiest month of his young life with Robert and Clara Schumann before returning to his friend, the violinist Joachim, in Hanover. And Brahms' happiness was complete when Joachim came to visit them, and for the occasion Brahms wrote one movement of a sonata in C minor, which Clara lovingly preserved. Brahms had no intention of ever publishing it, but it was found, the manuscript was found among her papers after her death and was published in the 20th century. And we owe the existence of this magnificent music to Clara Schumann. Now, meanwhile, Schumann wrote a rave review about Brahms in his music magazine, die Neue Zeitschrift für Musik, and he called the article Neue Bahnen, or New Paths. And in that article on Brahms, Schumann wrote that since the death of Beethoven 20 years earlier, there had been a vacuum in the history of music in Europe that no one was able to fill. Not Liszt, not Wagner, not Berlioz, not Mendelssohn, nor himself. And he said, at last has come one on whose shoulders the mantle of Beethoven has fallen. Over his cradle graces and heroes have presided. He played for us pianos, symphonies disguised as piano sonatas. And once he lifts his magic wand over the assembled forces of chorus and orchestra, we will have wonderful insights into the secrets of the spiritual world. Of course, Brahms was left dumbfounded by this rave review. He was only 20 years old, and here he was being proclaimed as the successor to Beethoven, and it certainly enraged all the great living composers like Liszt, Wagner, Berlioz, and others. But still, he wrote to He wrote to Schumann, "You have made me so extremely happy that I cannot express my thanks in words. May God grant that my works will soon be able to prove to you how much your love and kindness have uplifted and inspired me." Schumann also wrote to his publishers, Breitkopf und Härtel, to publish anything that Brahms would send to them, and he sent them his earliest piano works, among which were 3 piano sonatas, and he dedicated the second of those sonatas to Clara Schumann. The first he dedicated to his best friend, Joseph Joachim, who had introduced him to the Schumanns, and in asking permission to dedicate his sonata in F sharp minor to Mrs. Schumann, he wrote to Robert Schumann, "May I crave permission to put Mrs. Schumann's name in front of my second opus? I hardly dare to do so, and yet would be so glad to give you some small token of my reverence and gratitude." And so he wrote the dedication as Frau Clara Schumann, verehrend zugeeignet. As a loose English translation would be dedicated to Mrs. Clara Schumann with reverence, or reverentially dedicated to Mrs. Clara Schumann, quite different from just dedicated to. And Clara, of course, wrote back to him saying, "Your delicate attention has given me very great pleasure, and so please for today accept the very hearty thanks in writing, which I hope to give you in person when we meet again very soon." Meanwhile, Brahms, who had returned to his friend Joachim in Hanover, received the payment for his piano sonatas from Breitkopf und Härtel. And he went to the bank, cashed the checks, came back with the money, and made 3 rows of coins on the mantelpiece, and he set 3 piles of coins. And he told Joachim, he said, "The first is for you," because he had been borrowing money from Joachim. "The second is for my beloved father. And the third is for me. Come on, let's go and get some beer." And so, the Schumanns decided to visit Brahms and Joachim in January of the following year, 1854. Brahms found Schumann unusually silent. But other than that, there were no signs of impending disaster. And yet on 24th February, Schumann, who had been battling mental illness for years, he had schizophrenia, he heard voices, he was manic depressive, he heard sounds, voices, all kinds of things. So he decided to end his life by jumping from a bridge into the Rhine. And he was rescued by fishermen who were passing by in their boat. And now Clara finally had to agree to have him hospitalized, something that she had adamantly refused, wanting to keep her Robert with herself. Joachim and Brahms rushed to Clara's side and helped her find a private mental nursing home or hospital for Schumann. And then Joachim continued with his own concert tours as a violinist and his own job as Kapellmeister in Hanover, to the Prince of Hanover. Brahms had nothing to do and requested Clara if he could stay and look after the children while went on concert tours to support herself and the children and Schumann in the asylum. Clara wrote in her journal, "He does not say much, but I can see in his eloquent eyes how deeply he feels for the suffering one in Endenich, where the asylum was. I cannot help but feel what a sacrifice it is in one so young, for a sacrifice it surely is to be around me now." The Schumanns thus became the young Brahms's baptism of fire. He had never come across anyone like them, and their tragedy devastated him. His letters of the time give us a glimpse into the soul of the young Chrysler, as he liked to call himself, after the fictitious character created by his favorite writer, A.T.R. Hoffmann. He writes, "Dear Mrs. Schumann, the world does not deserve that people like you and your husband should be on earth at all. And I feel uplifted when I think that I may see the time when people will idolize you. Two such wholly